At 9:14 on the morning they were supposed to take my house, two men in gray shirts carried my sideboard out through my own front door and set it down on the lawn like it was theirs to set down. I had stripped that sideboard by hand, 3 coats. The winter the furnace died and I worked in a coat. I knew the spot on the left foot where the veneer had lifted and I'd clamped it back. And I stood on my own porch in my robe and watched a stranger carry it past me into the cold. There was a young family on the grass, a husband, a wife, a little boy in a red jacket holding his mother's coat. The wife had her phone up, taking pictures of the lawn, the porch, the windows, the way you photograph a thing that is about to be yours. They were smiling. And my mother was standing in the middle of it, in her good coat, talking to them the way a host talks to guests. She saw me come out. She didn't stop. She put her hand toward me, palm up, the way you'd point out a piece of old furniture that came with the place, and she said to the buyers, smiling the whole time, "Oh, that's Karen, don't mind her." It was never hers. She just lives here. It was never hers. 9 years. The debt no one else in my family would touch, the roof I paid for twice, the recorder's office where my name went down on the deed alone, with my hands still dirty from the work. I put my hand in the pocket of my robe. The deed was folded there, the same way I'd folded it every single morning for 6 weeks, 3 folds. Soft at the creases now. I didn't say anything. I want you to understand that because everything that happened after turns on it. I had every reason that morning to walk down those steps and end it in one sentence. I had the paper in my pocket that would have stopped all of it cold. I let them keep carrying. The wife lowered her phone and looked at me, just a flicker, the way you look at something sad you don't want to look at too long, and then looked back at my mother, who was already pointing at the bay window, saying, "We restored this in 17, took the whole season. We. I built that window." And I stood there and let my mother say, "We," and I made myself a promise on that porch that I'm going to keep later, and it's going to cost them everything. I wasn't going to stop this. I was going to let it happen, all of it, right up to the moment it fell, in front of every single person she'd told the lie to. The closing was set for 11. At my own kitchen table. They'd turned my house into the room where they'd sell it. I had an hour and 46 minutes. By 9:30, the street had come out. You learn something about people when they think a house is changing hands. The Petersons were on their porch with coffee. The man from the corner who walks his dog at the same time every day had stopped walking it and was just standing there. Doors I'd knocked on for 9 years, borrowing a ladder, returning a casserole dish, all of them open now with a face in them. And not one of those faces was looking at me like I belonged to the house. That's the whole wound. It wasn't just that my mother told the buyers I was nobody, it's that she'd been telling the street that for a year and a half, and the street believed her because she was the mother and I was the quiet one who came and went in work boots. To them, I was the woman who lived in the old Holloway place. Lived in, not owned. My mother had built that lie, brick by brick, conversation by conversation, the way she built everything. Slowly, smiling, so that by the time it mattered, the lie was already furniture. She moved through them now like she was hosting an open house. "They've waited so long for a place on this street," she said to Mrs. Peterson, tilting her head at the young family. "And it's just time. You can't keep a house going forever when, well, you understand." She didn't finish it. She never finished those sentences. She let other people finish them in their heads, worse than she ever would out loud. That was her whole gift. My father stood near the truck with his hands in his coat pockets. He didn't perform. He never performed. He just stood where she put him and let it be true around him, which I have come to understand is its own kind of choice. I went back inside. The crew had cleared the front room down to the rug. My table was still in the kitchen, because that's where the closing was happening. They'd left me one table to lose the house on. There were folders on it now, a man in a good jacket I didn't know setting out pens, a woman with a soft leather bag on her phone by the counter. The closing was real. The buyers were real. The money was real. And in 40 minutes, my brother was going to pull into the driveway in the truck my parents bought him, to watch them sell my house to pay for the business he kept losing. I went upstairs. I took off the robe, took the deed out of the pocket, held it for a second with the fold gone soft, and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket, flat against my chest. Then I went down to lose my house on purpose. 9 years ago, this house was a problem. Nobody in my family wanted to own. My grandmother had died and left it to all of us and none of us, the way old people do when they can't bear to choose, to the family, which meant left it to a fight. It had a bad roof, a worse furnace, and a second mortgage nobody knew about until the letters started coming. The number on those letters made my parents go quiet. It made my brother laugh and say, "Let the bank have the dump." I was 28. I'd been doing restoration work for 6 years by then. Other people's houses, kitchens, and staircases and water damage, good with my hands and bad at saying no. And I sat at my parents' kitchen table the night they were deciding what to do, and I listened to them talk about the house like it was a body they had to get rid of before it started to smell. My mother said, "Whoever takes it takes the debt. I won't have it touching the rest of us." And I said I'd take it. I remember the quiet. I remember my brother actually laughing, not cruel, worse than cruel, easy like I'd said something charming. "You," he said, "you'll never finish it. You'll be underwater in a year." My father didn't say anything. My mother looked at me a long moment and I thought, just for a second, she might say something like, "Are you sure?" Or "That's a lot, Karen," or even "Thank you." What she said was, "Well, at least it stays in the family. At least it stays in the family. Not at least Karen will save it. The house mattered to her. I didn't." That was the arithmetic of that kitchen, and it never once changed. I took the debt. I signed for it alone because the second my name was the one on the line, everyone else's name quietly evaporated. And the week the transfer cleared, I drove to the county recorder's office on my lunch break, still in my work clothes, and I sat in the parking lot afterward with the stamped copy in my hands. I want to tell you about that parking lot because it's the closest thing to a happy ending this story had for a long time. It was just a paper, gray county stamp, my name spelled right. But I sat there with the heater ticking and read my own name on the line where the owner goes. And for the first time in my life, I had something that said, in writing, that I was real, that what I did counted. Nobody had given it to me. I'd reached into a hole my whole family was backing away from and put my name on it. I folded it once and put it in the glove box and didn't tell anyone I'd recorded it because some animal part of me already knew. Already knew a day might come when the only thing between me and the people who made me would be a piece of paper with my name on it and theirs nowhere. Out on the lawn, 9 years later, one of the crew lifted the end of my grandmother's hutch and started walking it backward toward the truck. I watched through the window. I let him. There's a coffee can on the third shelf in the kitchen, blue, rusted at the rim. It's full of receipts. For 9 years, every winter, the money I made keeping other people's houses standing went into my brother's business instead. It started small and gentle, the way these things have to, or you'd never agree to the first one. The first winter, it was $4,000, and it came wrapped in my mother's voice on the phone. Just this once. Derek's between contracts and the baby's coming, and you know your father can't help the way he used to. Derek was always between contracts because Derek would underbid a job, botch it, and walk, and then there'd be a winter and a phone call and my mother's voice doing the thing it did. I paid it. Of course I paid it. You want to know why a woman lets a crew carry her furniture onto the lawn without a word? It's the same muscle, the one that says, keep the peace, keep the family, you're the one with the steady hands, you can absorb it. The 4,000 became 6 the next year, became 9, became a number I stopped saying out loud even to myself. And every time I'd write it on whatever was nearest and drop it in the can. I didn't keep them to use them. I kept them the way you keep a record of a thing you can't say. Proof to nobody that I wasn't crazy, that it had really been this much, this many times, only ever going one direction. Derek never paid back a cent. There was never any expectation he would. The money flowed one way, from the daughter who was fine to the son who needed it, and the family called that love, and I let them, because the alternative was to be the one who finally said no. And I didn't know yet what kind of woman that made you in our family. I know now. I was about to find out in front of the whole street. In the kitchen, the man in the good jacket, the buyer's attorney, I'd understand soon, reading glasses pushed up on his head, checked his watch and then the door. The small, involuntary check of a man waiting for a thing to start. I poured myself a cup of coffee in my own kitchen, in front of the people who'd come to take it, and nobody stopped me, because nobody there thought I was anyone who could. 6 weeks ago, on a Tuesday night at 11, I found out my house was for sale. Not from my parents, not from my brother, from a website. I was on the couch with my laptop, looking at listings the way I do. It's the job. You look at what's selling. And the site showed me a house near me, off-market, the quiet kind a particular agent shows to a particular buyer. I almost scrolled past it. Then I looked at the photo. It was my porch. It was my porch with my hanging baskets taken down, my living room with my furniture still in it, shot from an angle to make the room look bigger, my own couch in the corner of the frame. They'd been inside my house to photograph it. While I was at a job site, someone had walked through my home with a real estate agent and taken pictures to sell it, and on the seller line, where the owner's name goes, it said my parents' names, not mine, theirs. I sat there a long time. I didn't call anyone. I want to be honest about what I felt, because the pretty version is a lie. It wasn't shock, it was almost relief. It was the feeling of finally seeing the whole shape of a thing you'd only ever felt the edges of in the dark. They had decided the house was theirs to sell. They had decided I was a detail. And the tired part of me, the part that had been writing numbers on receipts for 9 years, said, "There it is. Now you know exactly what you are to them. Now you can stop guessing." I learned the rest in pieces over those 6 weeks. There was a speech I found out about secondhand at my parents' kitchen table. My mother saying it was time the family put its weight behind. Whoever keeps things going, and everyone there understanding that whoever did not mean me, even though I was the only one who ever had. The sale was to fund Derek's business. One more time, the largest time, the last time. Except this time, the money wasn't coming out of my pocket in $4,000 increments. This time, they were selling the pocket. I could have called a lawyer that night. I could have called them. I could have sent one message, my house, my name, stop, and ended it before it ever reached a lawn. I didn't. I closed the laptop and went to bed and started folding the deed into my pocket every morning, and I waited to see how far they would actually go. I needed them all the way out on the limb before I let it break. On the porch behind me, the title woman knocked and let herself in, soft leather bag and a closer smile, and said to the room, "Are we about ready?" I'll tell you what it does to a person, waiting 6 weeks to let yourself be robbed. It makes you very calm. Frighteningly calm, the kind my mother would have recognized as dangerous if she'd ever once looked at me long enough to see it. Every morning I got up, went to work, fixed other people's houses, and came home to a house I now knew my parents were trying to sell out from under me. I let my mother call me on Sundays and talk about the weather and Derek's kids, and not mention that she was selling my home. I learned that a person can carry a thing that heavy and still pass the salt. I did one thing in those 6 weeks, and only one. I drove back to the recorder's office, pulled the current record on the property myself, and read it twice. One name. Mine. No transfers, no additions, no second name had ever joined it. Whatever my parents had told that agent, whatever they told the buyers, the record underneath all the talking said the house was mine and had only ever been mine. I made one copy, folded it 3 folds, and that was the copy riding against my chest now, while the title woman set out her folders. Here's what I didn't know that morning. I knew they'd lied to the street and lied to the buyers. I thought I knew the whole shape of it, that I'd walk in, lay down the one paper that mattered, and watch the lie die quietly. I didn't know they'd brought a paper of their own. I didn't know that somewhere in that closer stack was a second document, a thing with my brother's name on it, that my parents had made to make the sale look clean, and that the making of it was a crime, sitting 12 feet from me, waiting to land on the one person in my family I had never once suspected of being smart enough to ruin himself. I poured the last of my coffee into the sink. A truck pulled into the driveway. Derek. It was almost 11. My brother came in through the back, the way he'd come in his whole life, and stopped when he saw me standing there in my jacket. And for just a second, something crossed his face. I'd call shame if I were feeling generous. I'm not. I'll call it calculation. He was working out whether I knew. Karen, he said. Just my name. Testing it. Derek. He looked around the kitchen, the folders, the title woman, the attorney with his glasses pushed up, and made the decision I watched him make. He decided I was here to be managed. He came over and put a hand on my shoulder and lowered his voice to the register men use when they're about to tell you something is for your own good. I know this is hard, he said. I know it doesn't feel fair, but Mom and Dad have thought about this a lot, and the house, it's just bricks, you know? The family's what matters. You'll land on your feet, you always do. You always do. There it was again, the family verdict they'd been reading over me my whole life. Karen's fine. Karen always lands on her feet, said by the man whose feet had been landing on my money for 9 years. I looked at his hand on my shoulder. I let it sit there a second. And then I said the only thing I said to him before the closing started. You should sit down, Derek. You don't want to be standing for this. He took it as nerves. He smiled, relieved, squeezed my shoulder, and went to sit by our parents at the far end of my table. He thought I was warning him I might cry. I was telling him the truth, and he heard comfort, because that was the only frequency he'd ever bothered to listen to me on. My mother sat at the head of my table like she'd bought it. My father sat beside her. The buyers came in last and sat across from the people they thought were the sellers, with the open, hopeful faces of people about to own their first home. The title woman folded her hands. All right, she said warmly. Shall we get started? We're here today for the sale of the property at... And she read my address out loud in my kitchen and asked, and the sellers are present? My mother said, we are. And I pulled out the chair at the empty end of my own table, sat down, and said, I'm present too. The title woman looked up from her folder with the polite confusion of a professional whose paperwork has just disagreed with the room. I'm sorry, she said. And you are? Karen Holloway, the owner of this house. You could feel the table change temperature. My mother's smile didn't move. She was too good for that, but something behind it set like a jaw. Karen, she said, light, warning, the voice from 1,000 Sundays. This isn't the time. It's exactly the time. I wasn't loud. I have spent my whole life being told I overcomplicate things, so I had decided that on this one morning, I would be the simplest person in the room. I reached into my jacket, took out the paper that had ridden against my chest for 6 weeks, unfolded it, and laid it flat on the table, turned so the title woman could read it right side up. That's the recorded deed for this property, I said. Pulled 3 weeks ago. There's one name on it. She didn't touch it right away. She read it where it lay, the way careful people do. I watched her eyes go to the line where the owner's name goes and stop, and read it twice, the same way I had in that parking lot, and I watched her become, in about 4 seconds, a different kind of careful. This is the current record? She asked me. You're welcome to confirm it. I'll wait. It's my house. The buyer's attorney slid the deed toward himself, put his glasses down off his head, and read it properly. The buyers looked back and forth between the faces, understanding only that something in the floor of the morning had shifted. The husband said quietly, to no one, "What's happening?" My mother said, "There's an explanation," and for the first time in my life, I heard a thread of something thin in her voice. "I'm sure there is," I said. "I'd love to hear it." And here's the thing. I thought that was the moment. I really did. I thought I'd laid down the one paper that mattered and the rest would just be the slow, satisfying sound of a lie running out of air. I thought I'd won, quietly, the way I do everything. I underestimated my mother one last time. She didn't fold. She reached into her own bag, took out a folder of her own, and slid a single sheet of paper across my table, past the deed, toward the attorney, with 2 fingers, like she'd been holding the trump card all along. "Then he'll want to see this," she said. The attorney picked it up. I watched my mother's paper travel into his hands and felt, for the first time that morning, something I hadn't planned for. I didn't know what it was. I built my whole calm around one fact, one name, my name, on the one record that counts. I had not accounted for my mother manufacturing a second one. "This," she said to the room now, her voice finding its footing again, "is a disclosure filed as part of the listing. It establishes the property is co-owned. Karen and her brother. Derek holds a 50% interest." She let it sit. "She's listed alone on the old deed, yes, a clerical matter from the transfer. The ownership was always shared, as our parents intended." I couldn't read the paper from across the table, but I could read Derek. He had gone very still. The man who'd called the house bricks 10 minutes ago was sitting beside our mother looking at a piece of paper with his own name on it that he had clearly never seen before this morning. And I understood, watching his face, that he hadn't made it. They'd made it for him. They'd forged his way into ownership of my house the same way they'd done everything, his whole life, handed him a thing he didn't earn and expected him to hold it and smile. The attorney studied it. "He's the man I want to talk about, because he's the one who turned that morning from a family argument into what it became." He didn't react. He read the disclosure, then reached over and pulled the deed back beside it and set the two papers next to each other on my kitchen table and looked at them the way I look at a wall I suspect is hiding water damage, slow, without assuming, looking for the place where the two things can't both be true. "Mrs. Halloway," he said, not unkindly, "this disclosure is signed by both owners, by Karen as well." He looked up at me over the glasses. "Did you sign this?" The whole room came to me, and I said the truest 4 words I'd said in 9 years. "I've never seen it," my mother said. "Fast now." "She signed it at the kitchen table. She's forgotten. She signs a lot of—" "It's notarized." Something in how he said it made my mother stop. "Notarized in April." "Karen, where were you in April?" I recalled exactly. Colorado. 3 weeks. A fire damage restoration outside Durango. I can give you the contractor, the motel, the dates, and about 40 photographs with timestamps. I paused. I have never in my life met the notary whose name is on that paper. He set the pen he'd been holding down on the table, very gently, and that small sound was the sound of the morning turning over. Because a forged deed is a family mess, a forged, notarized disclosure filed to move a sale is not a mess. That's the kind of thing a different category of person gets interested in. My mother had reached past the deed to play a higher card. She'd just handed the table a crime. "Karen always overcomplicates things," she said to the title woman with a little laugh, reaching for the old frequency, the one where she narrates and everyone agrees. "She'll come around. She always does." She always does. The 3rd time that morning. And for the first time, it didn't land on me at all. It just hung there in my kitchen, in front of a lawyer holding a forged document, sounding exactly like what it was. A woman who had run out of true things to say. Derek made it worse, the way I knew he would, because the only thing my brother had ever done reliably was make things worse for himself at the exact moment he was trying to help. The attorney had turned to him. "Mr. Holloway, the disclosure lists you as a 50% owner. Is that your understanding?" And Derek, God help him, looked at our mother, and our mother gave him the smallest nod, the one she'd been giving him his whole life, the "go on, take it, it's yours" nod. And he turned back and sat up a little and said, "Yeah, that's right, I'm 50%, always have been. It's a family property." He backed it. In front of a lawyer, in front of the title company, on the record, my brother looked at a forged document and claimed it. He thought he was rescuing the sale. He thought he was being the strong one, the keeper of the family, the way they always told him he was. He had no idea he'd just put his hand on the one paper in that house that could end him and press down. I almost felt something for him. Almost. The favorite never learns, the gift has a hook in it, because by the time the hook turns, the people who gave it to him are already standing back. The attorney made a small note. Then he turned to the title woman and said, "I think we need to stop the proceeding. I'd like you to put a hold on this file." "On what grounds?" my mother said. He looked at her, calm, the calm of a man who has decided to be exactly as careful as the situation requires and not 1 degree more. On the grounds that I have 2 documents in front of me that cannot both be true, one of them is notarized, and the owner of record says she was in another state when she signed it. The title woman already had her phone in her hand. Outside, the neighbors had been watching the front window the way you watch a television in a bar you can't hear. They'd seen the buyers go in hopeful, they'd seen my mother perform, and now they could see, even through glass, that something had gone wrong. The buyer's wife had stood up, the lawyer was on his feet, the title woman was walking toward the door with a phone to her ear and a look no one brings to a happy closing. My mother saw them seeing it. She'd spent 18 months curating that street's whole understanding of me, and now the street was watching her sale come apart through a window, and there was nothing she could narrate fast enough to fix it. The title woman stepped out onto my porch to make her call, and the second the door opened, the morning air came in, and the low neighbor voices, and I knew it had finally left the room. It was out on the lawn now. It belonged to everyone. The buyer's attorney did the thing I'll be grateful for as long as I own that house. He took his time. He didn't rush to judgment, and he didn't rush to mercy. He turned the disclosure a few degrees so the notary block faced my mother. I'd encourage you to look at whose stamp this is, he said, because right now the most charitable reading available to you is that someone signed Karen's name and a notary attested to it, and that reading is not a charitable one. That's the floor. It goes down from there. I watched my mother read the notary block. I watched her understand that whoever she'd used was a person who could be found, asked, and frightened. I watched her, for the first time in my entire life, run out of road, and here's the moment I'd actually waited 6 weeks for. Not the deed, not the lawyer. This. The buyer's wife, the woman who'd been photographing my lawn 3 hours ago, who'd looked at me on the porch with that flicker of pity, turned in her chair and looked at me. Really looked. And I watched her redo the whole morning behind her eyes. The sad woman in the robe they were told didn't belong here. The mother performing ownership of a house she didn't own. The crew carrying out furniture that, it was turning out, belonged to the only person no one had bothered to talk to. You own this house, she said to me. It wasn't a question. It was an apology with the shape of a sentence. I've owned it for 9 years, I said. I'm sorry. You and your husband are the only people here who didn't do anything wrong. She put her hand over her husband's on the table. They weren't getting the house, and they knew it now. And the fact that the first clean human feeling in that kitchen was 2 strangers grieving a home they'd never had, while my family sat there with a forged document. That's the thing I'd let the whole morning run for. Everyone in that room could finally see who'd actually been carrying what. The title woman came back in from the porch. She didn't sit. I've put the file on hold, she said. We're not closing today, and I'm obligated to flag the disclosure. She looked at my mother, then at Derek, with no warmth at all. Both of you should speak to your own attorney before you say anything else. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The closing had a shape it was supposed to have, signatures, a handshake, keys, and that shape had just been taken out of the room, and no one knew what to put in its place. The buyer stood first. His wife stopped beside my chair on the way out. She didn't say anything else. She just put her hand on my shoulder for a second, the same shoulder Derek had put his hand on to tell me it was only bricks, except hers meant the opposite thing, and I felt the difference all the way down. Then they were gone, out the front, past my mother, who said, I'm so sorry for the confusion, this will all be sorted, and the wife didn't even turn her head. She walked past my mother like she was a piece of furniture, like she was someone who just lived there. And the street saw that too. The buyers came out of the house they'd photographed for their move-in album with their folder empty and their faces closed, got in their car, and did not look back at the woman in the good coat trying to wave them down the walk. The neighbors watched them drive away. Then they watched my mother standing alone on my lawn with one hand still half raised. I came out onto the porch. I want to be honest about why. I could have stayed inside. The win was already complete. But I had promised myself a thing on that porch 3 hours earlier when she pointed at me and said it was never hers and I am not a big enough person to have skipped it. I came out to be seen on my own porch, by the same street that had watched me be erased, while the lie stood alone on the grass. My father had come out too. He stood off to the side, near the dead truck, hands in his pockets. He wasn't next to her anymore. I noticed it the way you notice. A load-bearing wall is gone, quietly, and then all at once understanding the whole house is different. The clear-out crew, who had no idea what had happened inside, came out the side door carrying my grandmother's hutch, the last big piece, to load a truck that wasn't going anywhere now. The foreman looked at the frozen tableau and said, to anyone, "So are we." "Loading, or—" "No," I said, from my porch loud enough for the lawn. "You can put it back, all of it, nothing's leaving this house." And the crew, who only ever followed whoever actually owned the thing, set the hutch down and started carrying my furniture back in. My mother turned around on the lawn to face me on the porch, and the whole street was the room now, and this was the moment. And I'd known for 6 weeks roughly what I wanted to say, and I still almost couldn't say it. That's the part nobody tells you about the thing you've waited for. It doesn't come out smooth. She looked at me. The woman who taught me to keep the peace, who built a lie about me one Sunday at a time, who pointed at me 3 hours ago like I was a sad fixture that came with the house. And for a second my throat closed all the way, and I had to stop and breathe once, in the cold, in front of everyone, and start the sentence over. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that, because she was watching for it. The break stayed in my throat where I kept it. My hands were still. I just had to find the bottom of my own voice before I could use it. "You told them it was never mine," I said. "Karen, for a year and a half you told this whole street, I just live here. You told those people on their move-in day that it was never mine." I came down one step. You stood on my lawn and pointed at me. "We can talk about this inside. There's no inside for you anymore. You don't get to talk to me where they can't hear." I came down another step onto my own grass. "You want to know the part you got wrong? It was never theirs." I looked at her and let it go all the way out, level into the cold. So the Petersons heard it, and the man with the dog heard it, and my father heard it. It was never theirs. They just sold it. She didn't have anything. For the first time in my life, my mother stood in front of me with her mouth slightly open, and nothing came out, because there was no version, no narration, no Sunday voice sentence that could unring it. The buyers were gone. The lawyer was a witness. The forgery was flagged. And the street she'd spent 18 months teaching to see me as nobody had just watched me come down my own steps and put a name to the whole thing in 4 words. Derek had come out behind her. "Karen, come on, this is family, we can." And I turned and looked at my brother and said the last thing I said to either of them that day. "You told a lawyer you owned half of it, Derek. On the record, you should call someone, not me, someone with a license." And I watched it finally reach him, watched the favorite understand, 3 hours too late, that the gift had a hook in it and the hook had turned, and our parents were already, even now, standing a little apart from him on the grass, the way they stand apart from anything that started to cost them. I went back up my steps. At the top, I turned around once. My mother was still on the lawn. My father had taken 2 steps toward the street, away from her. And the neighbors weren't looking at me like I lived there. They were looking at me like I'd owned the place. I went inside and shut my own front door, and on the other side of it the crew was carrying my sideboard back to where I'd stripped it by hand. Here's what a neighborhood does. After. It doesn't take your side in a speech. Nobody came over with a casserole and a confession. The story just changes hands. My mother's version, that nice family, that poor confused daughter, that house they so generously kept going, died on the lawn that morning, and the street's version grew over the top of it like grass. By the weekend it was, 9 years she's owned that house, did you know that? And they had a crew here. Mrs. Peterson brought my mail to my door, mail that had been going to her by some quiet arrangement I'd never agreed to, and stood on my porch and said, "I didn't know, Karen. I want you to know I didn't know." And I believed her. The lie hadn't been hers. She'd just been handed it, the way streets are. My mother stood alone on that lawn a while after I shut the door. I know because the man with the dog told me later, the way he'd never have told me anything before. She stood there, and then my father walked to the car, and she followed him, and they drove away, and she did not come back that day or the next. That's the immediate part. The fallout that mattered took about a week. The forged disclosure didn't stay in my kitchen. It went where flagged documents go. There were questions for the notary whose stamp it was. There were questions for my parents who'd filed it. And there were questions for the one person who'd stood up at a kitchen table and claimed it out loud, on the record, in front of a lawyer. My brother's business ran on a bank line, borrowing against the next job to finish the last one, the whole house of cards I'd been quietly bracing for 9 winters. And a bank that's lending to a man will, eventually, hear his name turned up on a forged document in a fraud flag tied to a property sale. Banks have a word for that. They do not like it, and they do not wait around to see how the story ends. They called his line, a covenant here, a review there, and a business that only ever stayed alive by borrowing forward could not survive being looked at closely. The thing they sold my house to fund died anyway. It died because they reached past the truth to grab more than was theirs, and they put Derek's name on the reaching. They sold my house to save his business, and in doing it, they killed his business, and they didn't even get to keep my house. There's a justice in it so clean, it almost looks designed, and it wasn't. It's just what happens when people who've never been told no build their whole lives on the assumption that the quiet one will absorb it. Eventually, the quiet one steps to one side and they go over the edge they've been leaning on her to stop. My mother called, eventually, and left a message in the Sunday Voice like none of it had happened, weather and grandkids, and an aside near the end about how families have to forgive. I didn't call back. That's not cold to me. That's just the deed staying in one name. My father is the one I'll end on because he surprised me. A few months later, I was on my porch in the evening, my furniture back inside, the sideboard against the wall where it belongs, and I saw him walk past. Alone. Slow. He didn't come up the walk or knock. He just slowed in front of the house and looked at it, the whole length of it, and I think for the first time he actually saw it, saw that it had been standing for 9 years because of me, that the we his wife kept saying had only ever been one person in work boots. Then he looked at me on the porch, and he didn't say anything, and neither did I. He lifted his hand a few inches. Not a wave. Just an acknowledgement. The smallest possible admission that I was there, that I was real, that the house was mine. Then he walked on. I framed the deed. I know that's a little much. It's in the hallway now, the Gray County stamp, my name on the line where the owner goes, the same paper I sat with in a parking lot 9 years ago when it was the only thing in the world that said I counted. It still says it. One name. If you've got a family that's spent your whole life telling you what you are, let me tell you the one thing I learned standing on that porch in my robe. Let them say it as loud as they want. Just make sure your name's the one on the paper underneath all the talking. The talking is theirs. The ground is yours. I tell these stories because I know how many of you are the quiet one, the one with the steady hands, the one they're sure will always land on her feet. If that's you, stay close. There's a new one every week, and every one of them ends with somebody finally putting their name to the truth out loud. Subscribe, and I'll see you on the next porch.